every single year you get disease, you get pests, you get all that stuff. Well, we need to figure out a way to kind of avoid it. And this is really the best way I've found to, I don't want to say avoid it, because on Sandy Bottom Homestead, we are all about truthfulness and honesty and transparency, but you will absolutely minimize the amount of pests and disease you do if you follow this one simple yet complicated task. Crop rotation, okay? Crop rotation is very, very important. And I've gotten a few people ask me recently, like in like the last video or two, about my crop rotation. So I figured, you know what, it's a good time to do it. We focus a lot on planting on this channel. So we will be planting our gardens. I think if you don't have a solid plan, you don't have a garden really. So this is part of that process, and you might as well start now while you got stuff in your garden and you're looking at it. So I'm gonna go over my crop rotation. I am gonna say this about crop rotation. It doesn't matter until it matters, okay? So you may be rotating crops and saying, well, I've never had a problem, and then one day you stop and then bam, all of a sudden it just falls apart. Well, you know, I don't want that to happen, so I have a simple rotation plan in place. And before we do that, why do we rotate crops? We rotate crops because of pests. We rotate crops because of nutrient needs and demands on the soil. And we rotate crops for diseases. So all of those combined is the perfect reason to do it, if you ask me. What I've done here is I've created a plan for myself that's relatively simple to follow. We do garden 4 seasons a year here, so it does get a little bit difficult at times to keep track of. But for the most part, what we do is we rotate and we move each bed up and around the clock. That's the idea. The trick this year is I moved these 4 beds over here, so it kind of threw everything wacky. But after next year, we will get back into that and it'll still be the same. Some crops will still move the exact same way and some won't. And you can always adjust it. I mean, here's the deal with crop rotation off the get-go. Can you plant something 2 seasons in a row? You know, can you put tomatoes in the same spot the next year? Absolutely you can. You know, there's a limit, and I'm not so sure about how long that limit is, but I've done it. I did it this year, you know, where I did a season of tomatoes and then I came back and I did a season again because I had to. And, or it wasn't tomatoes. I can't remember. It was a nightshade is what it was. So it was the same family and it worked out fine, right? But next year I absolutely would not put it back in there. So the idea is put a nightshade family here. So we have white potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants. All those would go in this bed and they would not go back in this bed for a year or so, right? So with the size of my garden, I can get 2 years to 3 years before I have to get back into one of these beds, which is good. But the idea is I would just take everything, all the nightshades, and move it over here. Now this is why I developed my plan like this, where I am growing, I'm either monocropping beds like you see here, or we are planting by family. So for instance, this bed here, this bed was tomatoes and peppers. Well, those are both nightshades. So that worked out fine, right? Next year, we will not have those in this bed. It's funny, I've been looking at this plant for like a month now thinking, what kind of pepper is this? I thought it was deformed or something. It's a damn weed that grew this much in like 2 months. Isn't that crazy? I just had to pull it up real quick. That's wild. What it is now that I look at it, I got this American Beauty Berry that I acquired, and this thing is spreading everywhere. I mean, as long as I know to take care of it, it's not bad. I like the bush, but man, that's kind of brutal. So okay, back to the regularly scheduled program. So this bed this year had tomatoes in it 2 years in a row, and it did not do great, but it didn't do great not because of the fact that it had tomatoes in it last year. It's the fact that it was tired and the soil wasn't replenished and it's been used really hard. So, you know, that doesn't really make a difference. But what will happen if I kept planting tomatoes in here year after year is you're gonna come through and you're gonna have total crop die off. Mark my words, eventually you will get a disease that will kill all of your crop. And that's not what we want, right? That's a waste of time at that point. So just remember that when you do this, it's like, yeah, that's kind of gonna be an issue. And again, you may not see it for 2, 3, 4 years, but on that 5th year, you ain't gonna have nothing to show for your work. So the best thing to do is just stay on top of it and keep moving it around. Go back 3 years for this one bed, and I'm gonna show you how it's been planted and what's been going in this bed and how it's moved. So it's gonna get a little bit confusing, but just follow me. And remember, we're planting 3 times a year. Okay, so the first year this had potatoes in it, right? It had potatoes in the spring, went into summer, didn't do anything in the summer, came back, did Brussels sprouts. And then Brussels sprouts grew in this bed throughout the winter. And then into the next year, we did tomatoes. So this bed, that was this bed. And then that same plan essentially moved here minus the tomatoes. So what we did after the potatoes came out is we started putting in our buckwheat cover crop in between. And then this was, again, Brussels sprouts this year. And then you can see the exact same thing happened here. If you remember in the other videos, here's a buckwheat that has been reseeded. So that is growing, and now we are back into our Brussels sprouts. So next year, am I gonna put it here? I think I actually may skip over and move over here, because this is a really big crop for us for the fall into winter. And this half of my garden here, this is the shady half here. This is the sunny half in this time of year. So I think I wanna move them over and see how they do next year over there. If you had to give degrees of shadiness, this would be the shadier section. And then as you move up, it gets more and more light. But we do think we struggle with that in the winter. So if we do that, let's just say we move our Brussels sprouts over here. Then we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of moving the bed if we did only one bed, which we may go up to 2 beds in the future. Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are gone, right? So I'm gonna be straight up with you. I can't remember what went here 3 years ago, but I do remember this one for 2 years. So after we did the potatoes over here over the winter. Oh man, I told you I remembered. I think I did radishes and turnips in this bed. And then once they came out, we let it sit for about a month or 2. And then we came back and we planted, what's it called? Squash. So we did squash in this bed, and then the squash came up and we let it go. And then we came back and we put the broccoli in. And so the same thing will happen on down the road. So what we notice here, if we just look at this, is we had a squash, which I believe is the cucumber family. Don't take my word on it. I'm not really big on the families. I know what all the squashes fall under, but either way, the family. And then we went into a brassica. We'll grow this out this year. This is a brassica, this is broccoli. And you can see it's doing fairly well. The cabbage worm is on here, and I did treat it, but I think I need to do another treatment stat after this video. And for that, I'll use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. But after this comes up, then what we'll do is we're gonna come back, and I may just put a broccoli or a cabbage back in this bed in the spring, even though it was just planted. If I can get this whole rotation on this new garden setup locked in, then we can do one more year in here, and then we can switch over. And so from now on, what we would do is we would do something like, just to put it simply, I'd do broccoli right now in the fall, and then in the spring I'd come back and I would do rutabagas, root crop versus a broccoli crop. Why is that? What does that help? Glad you asked that, because rutabagas don't use a lot of nitrogen, while broccoli uses a lot of nitrogen. So it really helps both ways. The nitrogen is depleted, but the rutabaga doesn't really need a lot. And as we put our regular fertilizer in it, it won't counteract it and cause it to grow more greens instead of roots. So you see that's how we kind of operate, right? So for instance, if we come up here for the summer, got about 5 days left before we harvest our sweet potatoes. But you better believe, as hard as these sweet potatoes have been growing, we will not be growing more sweet potatoes here next year at minimum. And it's very unfortunate because I really like growing my sweet potatoes here. Really, really like growing them here. I don't know yet. We're testing out with smaller beds to see how much we're gonna get. But as far as the way they grow, the amount of sun, the looks of it, I really do like the way they grow. But next year we are not gonna put them back in the same spot. We're gonna move them back a bed. And then we may move them back another bed the next year. We may move them up forward. Because of the way sweet potatoes grow, I do try to do a 2-year rotation, but a lot of times it's only a 1-year rotation, and that's gonna have to be good enough until it's not good enough. But as far as like adding more soil in and all that stuff, you can definitely do it, and it does help to minimize the issues if you're adding a lot of soil back into your beds. So, you know, these, we do need to add a lot in, so we do get that help. So next year we'll probably move back a bed, and then we're probably gonna come back forward. And I'm gonna be honest, it's gonna be a pain in the butt moving it back a bed. It's gonna clog everything up, but that's sweet potatoes, man. It's what we love. What if you only had one bed? What do? Got one bed? My guess is you probably have cucumbers, tomatoes, probably a couple squash plants in there. You probably got a whole smattering of it. So how far do you move the plants, right? Because we want to rotate. The best thing I can tell you, if you had to put on your imagination cap and say we just had like a patch of lettuce here, let's say we had like 10 of these plants right in one section, and then the next season or something like that you wanted to grow more, I would move this all the way over to the other side of the bed and just try to keep it away from that soil as much as possible. And then the same thing with the bok choy, like we have this row here, I would just move it over a row. If we had 4 different crops and 4 different rows, I would move this row over here, this row over here, this row. You know, you would just try to get them as far away as possible as you can. The other thing you can do is you can just not grow something one year. It sucks, and that's part of it. And that's why sometimes, not every time, there's a lot to this, but a bigger garden can be a better garden, but it can also be a nightmare. So you want to find that sweet spot in how much you want to grow and how much you can take care of. And then once you get that figured out and get your crop rotation down, you'll see that over the years you will be fighting less and less and less. Now that you've made it this far into the video, I can give you my example. I had this earlier this year, but we had a trellis here last year, and we grew green beans on it, I think 3 years in a row. No, it was cucumbers and then green beans. But what I didn't realize is they were susceptible to the same disease. Well, for 2 years in a row, both green beans and cucumbers got that same disease. And so we had to essentially just remove the trellis and say we're not gonna grow there anymore. And that really helped with that process because we were able to grow full crops in here where this trellis suffered for the whole year. We have another trellis that's showing the same symptoms, which is this arch right here. So we put our green beans on there, and they did all right this year, but they kind of fizzled out pretty quick. So we're not gonna put beans on there next year. We're gonna have to get kind of creative with our rotation. So if I'm looking at just the trellises here, right? So we've got squash on this trellis. We actually don't have anything on this trellis now. It's just this squash growing over here. And then we've got black-eyed peas or cow peas, whatever you want to call them, on the front trellis. We got to rotate that, right? So what we do in the summertime is we want to plant green beans, cucumbers, squash, and black-eyed peas, right? And I do have a trellis back here, back there somewhere, that we can do as well. So if there's squash here this year, then we're gonna try and put black-eyed peas here. We're gonna put our cucumbers up there. We'll put our squash back here. We'll probably put our green beans back here. The only trick with this trellis is I have to plant the green beans as soon as it gets warm enough, because the sunlight that hits this is just a lot less. So we'll get it up to a point and then it'll come down and we won't get as much. But this trellis hasn't been growing on in a year or two, so it's worked out pretty good. We'll flop them, right? But I also have to look up and make sure that none of these crops share the same disease patterns, and that's really important. So crop rotation is very complicated. It sucks, and it's why I don't do companion planting, because it made it that much more difficult. I've looked at it and said, what's more important to me? Companion planting or crop rotation? And crop rotation won once I weighed the pros and cons, and so that's what I do.